We're excited to have everyone here. It's been 3 years since we've had an in-person seminar. And it's actually relevant for our topic today because social interaction is a social determinant of health. To get started today, I'd like to invite our interim Green Building and Sustainability Manager, Heidi Casper. She's going to introduce the topic and our speaker.
Today's seminar is on designing for public health, and it's a super important topic. We've had a lot of our stakeholders tell us how important this is to them. A lot of that work actually ended up in these new ratings, and there was a whole working group that was just dedicated to health. So we are thrilled to be able to have global and local experts with us here today that are going to explore that juxtaposition where public health meets healthcare, meets climate, meets housing. They're going to present projects that serve diverse communities and explore community health elements that advance social impact, sustainability, and resilience. Creating healthier communities that promote human dignity and joy is at the heart of designing for equitable futures. Building social equity and advocating for environmental sustainability means considering whole systems, cultures, and communities. We're excited to hear more about how to implement these strategies. So without further ado, I'm going to introduce our first speaker, Katie. Katie Swenson is a nationally recognized design leader, researcher, writer, and educator. She's a senior principal at Mass Design Group. Katie's work explores how critical design practice can and should promote economic and social equity, environmental sustainability, and healthy communities. She has over 20 years of experience in the theoretical and practical applications of design thinking and is a talented global public speaker and thought leader. We're so lucky to have her here today. Katie authored Design with Love, At Home in America and in Bohemia, a memoir of love, loss, and kindness, both published in August 2020. She co-authored Growing Urban Habitats, Seeking a Housing Development Model with William Morris and Susan Schindler. Katie was awarded the AIA Award for Excellence in Public Architecture in 2021. And prior to joining Mass, Katie was the Vice President of Design and Sustainability at Enterprise Community Partners, a group that I'm always looking to for inspiration. An alumni of the Enterprise Rose Fellowship, second class, she was tapped to lead and grow the program in 2007. Katie founded the Charlottesville Community Design Center in 2004. She teaches at the Parsons School of Design at the New School and lectures extensively on sustainable community development and affordable housing. She holds a Bachelor of Arts in Comparative Literature from the University of California, Berkeley, and a Master of Architecture from the University of Virginia. Katie was awarded a Loeb Fellowship at the Harvard Graduate School of Design in 2019. Again, thank you so much for joining us today, and please give her a warm welcome.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that introduction and the nice long version of my bio. So good to be here with you in Austin. I didn't even know it rained here. I mean, what's up with that? I did get a chance last night. I came in for the Austin Green Building Awards. I got a chance to take an electric scooter around town, so that was really fun. I'm glad I got a little bit of the Austin vibe before the rain came, but congratulations on a beautiful rainy day. We are excited to enter into dialogue with you all today. I'm taking a lens on my talk today that's going to focus a lot on storytelling, telling kind of stories of abundance. I would say in our field, we often talk about stories of crises. We talk about the need to remediate these kind of environmental degradations and other inequities that we've been suffering in our communities. So I'm going to talk about the role of storytelling in projecting a world where public health and sustainability is integrated into our way of being. I'm going to tell this story in 7 parts, and you'll learn a little bit more why. So I'm going to start with this idea about seeking community. When I was an architecture student at the University of Virginia, getting my master's of architecture, I was a kind of volunteer by night with a local housing organization, not unlike Foundation Communities, actually now led by Sunshine Mathone, formerly of Foundation Communities. And I had this thought that I was going to have to be an architect by day and a social justice warrior by night. I started volunteering with this local group called Piedmont Housing in Charlottesville, Virginia. And they alerted me to an opportunity that was calling for something called community architects. And I was like, whatever a community architect is, like, that is exactly what I want to be. And so I applied to be a Rose Fellow at Piedmont Housing, now led by Sunshine Mathone, a local community group in Charlottesville, Virginia, where I started to learn what it might be to work in alliance with local community members in a community group, to understand the holistic needs of a community and how development and design could amplify their efforts. This was in the days of, we were doing Energy Star housing in 2001. I started to learn how to design California corners and ladder framing and use different sorts of insulation and other forms in the early green building days. We were then working on, with Gail Vittori, what would become the Enterprise Green Communities criteria. But I was also learning how to work in partnership with new homeowners and understand the sort of holistic needs of community members. Very proud of these small but highly efficient houses. Also, working in a neighborhood meant also taking on the other kind of holistic needs. So this was a project for a new community center that was outside of the housing goals, but I understood as a community architect my job was not just to do one thing, but to try to do everything and anything I could in support of the community with whom I was working. I was able then to take on the leadership of the Enterprise Rose Fellowship Program, which was an incredible opportunity to network with architects and designers, landscape architects from all over the country who were seeking a passion to work with local community-based groups. So we would, I ended up working in about 90 different groups. I was a bit of a road warrior at the time, and got to understand what did it mean for communities to be able to leverage design as part of their toolkit to improve the conditions for their neighbors and the people that they cared about. The places that are highlighted are featured in what we'll talk about my book, Design with Love. So through working with the different fellows and communities, I started to understand how people's individual passions and missions informed their own work and their own commitments. David Flores was a fellow in my class of 2001 to 2004. David was born in Texas, but immigrated to the U.S. with his parents and aunt and 2 siblings at the age of 9. But when David was 19, his father was arrested, incarcerated, and deported, and the family was splintered. David found some refuge at the University of Arizona studying architecture, and in many ways that kind of deep engagement at school and with the local faculty really changed David's life. He went to San Isidro to work with quirky poster architects and a local community group called Casa Familiar, and here built this first housing project called Las Casitas. The border, of course, of San Isidro and Tijuana is an incredibly complex place. And over time, what being a community architect meant for David was joining the planning commission, starting an arts organization, building libraries, building schools, and fighting for the rights of pedestrians and others who are crossing the border every day, going back and forth. What David essentially helped me understand was that being a community architect meant providing a kind of bridge for families across borders. He said families are not governed by borders. They are governed by love. And I think this idea about what role the physical environment plays in determining our lives, but of course also what are the other pieces that of course supersede the physical environment. I traveled the country quite a lot at that time, and one of the other chapters that's in the book is here at Santo Domingo Housing Authority at the Kiwa Pueblo outside of Santa Fe, New Mexico, where my colleague here on the left, Joseph Kunkel, was a Rose Fellow. He now works with me at Mass and runs our Sustainable Native Communities office in Santa Fe, New Mexico. I brought this picture up because I'm here with my oldest daughter, Sophie, who's now 25, on a trip I took when we were in the writing process of Design with Love. After participating in this program and then running it over the course of about 18 years and all of this travel, I had been one person who got to see kind of all of the projects. I felt compelled to write about them. I also had an internal kind of debate. How could I, as a person who had never known housing insecurity, economic insecurity, had never suffered sort of a racial disparity, how could I then tell the stories of others? And I think it's the kind of conflict that is important to both recognize and grapple with. I was lucky in this case to have the support of these local partners. Manuela Lovato is here. She's an artist in the Kiowa Pueblo. This room, actually, her brother was chief of this Pueblo community for 50 years. He had died about 6 months before we got there. We never would have known that he was chief if he had not actually passed away. And she said the Kiowa Pueblo is primarily an oral history. She said she used to gather with her family. Her parents and grandparents would always try to impart knowledge, wisdom, and storytelling while eating around the fire. They would say, swallow the words that you're hearing along with your food so that you'll be able to internalize it. Here's Cynthia. Aguilar was the local librarian working hard to keep the language alive at Santo Domingo. She said, we really want to see books about our community on the shelves of our libraries for our kids. These gave me courage, but also don't necessarily solve the essential problem. I would say in the lives of, being able to be the one to be able to work with these individual communities to tell what came to 10 stories with an introduction about my work in Charlottesville, Virginia, trying to advocate for the fundamental right for housing, but also trying to tell the story of this beautiful community development network that has to be in place to make these kinds of projects happen. So I encourage you to read this. Each of the chapters explores a different aspect of the community development field, told through the stories of its local practitioners. I think there comes a time in one's life, though, when one has to also tell kind of one's own story. This is a picture of me with my children when they were quite small and I was on this path. I loved that back in 2007, the article is called Home is Where Her Heart Is. For me, home was always a sort of essential part of my life. Growing up in the suburbs of Boston, I went to school in the city of Boston and had the chance to volunteer at a local shelter for women called Rosie's Place, then a very small entity in the South End, a brownstone, had only about 13 rooms for women to stay overnight, just for a couple nights at a time, but then also had this kind of bustling lunchroom. This was actually a photograph I took outside the Boston Public Library when I was a junior in high school and being part of this. What I didn't quite understand then was the extent that housing affordability and availability was going to shift in this country to the kind of crisis moment that it's in. So in the mid-'80s, when I was in high school, you can see this kind of dotted line. It's dotted because this is sort of interpreted data. But for those of you who were born after the 1980s, by the way, I just want to tell you, homelessness was not actually always like a thing. I mean, maybe there have always been people who haven't had a permanent home, but never in the kind of numbers that we experience today. And somehow we've come to accept that this is like part of our world now. So it didn't always exist, it doesn't have to exist, and we should, of course, be doing something about it. So it's in this context that I had this kind of duality within myself of having known only kind of housing security and being quite attached to home. In fact, I've renovated and redone homes. I've delighted as an architect and as a mom and just as a person in the power of home. In 2007, I found myself on the verge of a divorce. However, I was living in Charlottesville. I had those 3 little kids. That was just taken right before I moved to Boston, to be near my extended family, to have help in raising my children. And I had the incredible fortune of having help from my parents to buy this house called the Scarab. At the time, it had sat empty for 3 or 4 years and had only suffered a kind of 1970s renovation since it was built in 1907. But this incredible home was built by 2 amazing women. One was Catherine Lee Bates, who wrote America the Beautiful and was a professor at Wellesley College, and her beloved partner named Catherine Coleman, who was a sociologist. She integrated a love of history, economics, but she was always interested in economics and history of the poor, of women, of immigrants. So she was kind of an early founder of the field of sociology. So these 2 intrepid women, born in the 1850s and partners for 25 years, hired an architect to build them a house that would kind of reflect their aspirations. Architecture as a way to sort of say, who are we and how do we live together? So they were big fans of Nathaniel Hawthorne and many of the American authors, and modeled a 3rd floor space called Bohemia, which gave them a sort of private retreat above the busy sort of domestic realm below. So many years later, I met and fell in love with a remarkable man, and we got engaged, and he moved into this house full of women. We planned our wedding and started to rejoice. We decided to renovate the 3rd floor room of this house, which Catherine Coleman and Catherine Lee Bates had called Bohemia. This room that was meant to be a kind of creative escape above all the busyness down below. So we rebuilt this room as kind of a way for us to use architecture to kind of contain the narrative of our lives and our evolving relationship. But 2 months before our wedding, on May 17th, 2017, Tommy had a heart attack that was very sudden and fatal. And I plunged into a kind of formerly impossible to imagine grief. I escaped up to Bohemia. It became the place where I went, the place that we had built together. I don't think I ever could have imagined how this house and its people would comfort me, how architecture and my home would become a place of refuge. We speak about architecture as public health. How does it fill you? How does it hold you in these times of crisis? My girlfriend Holly had said to me on the phone, maybe 3rd day after he died, trying to comprehend the incomprehensible. She said, we get to keep the gifts they gave us from these people who we loved and we lost. And I started writing like a banshee up in Bohemia. Became my way to express myself. It became my way to understand where I was. Along the path in the summer, one of my girlfriends sent me a 1st edition copy of a book that Catherine Lee Bates had written about her beloved Catherine Coleman. Catherine Coleman had contracted breast cancer in 1911 and passed away in 1915. Catherine Lee Bates' account of this experience is actually our first recorded account of breast cancer in history. She also then later wrote this book of poetry called Yellow Clover. And the last poem is called In Bohemia, a corona of sonnets. A crown, of course, is circular, so each of the sections, 7 sets of 7 sonnets, each section begins with a phrase. I give you joy, my dearest. Death is done. And of understanding this first moment of release. Second, though, our word shall still be joy, shall still be joy. How, in grief, when you're overwhelmed by sadness, do you possibly hold on to the joy and love that had defined your relationship? I could not bear my grief, but that I must. And on she goes. I'm finding, living in this room, living in this space where she had written this poem, that I'm learning through her words, through her story, and through her space, how to bear this grief and move on myself. So the last section is, your sentence by my quavering voice was told. And so it was. I wrote the story of my love, my beloved, this house, this architecture, these women, and the lessons that I was able to learn about how to navigate this period of grief. I told my own story. In architecture, we have a kind of interesting and I think fatally flawed at the moment relationship to story. In this year's Venice Biennale, curator Leslie Loco put out a call to architects saying that the dominant voice in architecture has been historically a singular, exclusive voice. The story of architecture, she says, is therefore incomplete. Not wrong, she says, but incomplete. I think she's being quite generous. I've been trying to understand this relationship that we have over an emphasis on starchitects and the firms that have a name that have hundreds of people working for them, but the emphasis is on the person's name who owns the firm. Makes no sense. And iconic buildings. And I want to argue that instead we need to use storytelling and narrative to lift up the voices of the many people involved in projects, not only the many architects and designers involved, but also the community members and other people involved, to really get at idea of systemic change. So going from an emphasis on architect and building to collective voices and systemic change. Christian Benimana leads our Rwanda office for Mass Design Group. Christian has himself a fascinating story. He grew up in Rwanda, and in the early days he was a painter. But in the wake of the 1994 genocide against the Tutsi, Christian wanted to give back. At that time, there was no school of architecture in his country. He went to China. He had to learn Mandarin, speaking of narrative and language, in order to learn architecture. And he came back to Rwanda to work with us and build out the Mass office, which currently has about 85 people in Rwanda, one American. He was invited by Leslie to make a submission. And his charge was a little bit complicated. He said, I don't want to show any buildings, not even models of buildings, and I don't want to be in the thing at all, like it has to be about others. And I have this concept called Afrotect. When Christian was growing up, one of his native languages is Kinyarwanda. There's no word for architect in Kinyarwanda. You know, the word architect, of course, comes from a Greek word, which means the, I think I have it somewhere in here, but the one who oversees the masons, essentially. It's kind of the director. And in Kinyarwanda, there was no word for architect. So I said, well, what are the words that kind of in Kinyarwanda describe this process?
Every place in the world is unique. Every people, every culture is unique.
Ijambo rirarema. A word creates or a word builds.
Language is, or gives me the feeling that I'm able to express my culture, myself, and my tradition through a process of creation.
These strong words that we have in our language, they refer to very, very powerful philosophies. They refer to mere men and women. It takes away the notion that it's these unachievable, very, very high standards and brings them to the level of humans and humanity.
ubupfura,
imfura, umuntu,
ubudehe,
guzu,
love,
kindness,
umuganda,
spirit of
respect to humanity.
reflection inwards, our culture.
A group of people who are in the same place at the same time, working on something to make it better.
So in this process, essentially we first identified about 20 words and then kind of focused in on about 12 of them to try to understand sort of what is the larger, how do you describe the project of architecture without using the word architect? And so you see here these kind of lists of words that gave us kind of deeper insights. I think it's fascinating when we use a single word to define a whole sort of set of circumstances, what in fact we're kind of losing in the process. Umuganda was one of the words you heard during that short video, which people who visit Rwanda will often learn because there's a practice of Umuganda now. On the last Saturday of every month, the entire country basically goes home to their communities and participates in a joint work day. Usually, I think it's 7 a.m. to 11 a.m. So if you're a tourist or visitor, like there's no coffee shop, nothing's open. Everybody else has to stay home, and people gather together to work in this practice of working together towards a collective vision. So you can see JPU, one of our site architects, talking about Umuganda is coming together to work collectively towards a shared vision. Jo Christa is a landscape architect. She'll be the first licensed landscape architect in Rwanda. We all have that spirit of Umuganda within us. Christelle is a interior designer. She now runs our mass-made furniture program. She grew up in Burundi, growing up in community, understanding that everything in her life was relative to her family. And Noella is one of our design directors, that she says, you know, Umuganda is about what we do in architecture. So this idea that the words that we use, the narrative that we choose, is not complete, is not necessarily helping us understand the full project of what we have. So we at Mass Design Group, Mass stands for Model of Architecture Serving Society, are working together to kind of understand how the project of architecture needs to be greater than. That we need to lift up collective and individual voices, recruit passionate people who have a range of expertise to be able to get at the systems which need to change for our world. We're about 165 people now on, we have 5 studios. We're from all over the world, about 20 countries represented in our crew. And I'm going to share with you a few of our projects and try to understand how they apply in this setting. So we got started here in Rwanda, this country in Central East Africa, about 12.5 million people, an incredibly beautiful place. There was a meeting of Dr. Paul Farmer, a leader in the public health world. He started Partners in Health. And this doctor, Dr. Agnes Benawahu, a Rwandan pediatrician who'd come back to Rwanda after the genocide against the Tutsis to lead their public health division. They were outraged at the kind of lack of moral imperative around bringing health services to the poor. Paul Farmer had a very specific kind of philosophy, which he defined in many ways, including a preferential option for the poor. He would say they don't just deserve as good as or something decent, but actually the best healthcare, the best architecture. So our first project, the Butaro District Hospital, was built in this northern region of Rwanda. So Butaro is up near the Volcanoes National Park, where the majestic mountain gorillas live. Rwanda is this stunningly beautiful country, land of 1,000 hills. I like to tell people it's a little bit like New Zealand meets Tuscany, just in case you thought you had an idea about Africa. The project was built using this kind of community build method around Umuganda, but sort of professionalized with hiring the local community and using local resources to build the project. One of the main charges was how to prevent the spread of indoor airborne diseases like tuberculosis. So in this case, all of the hallways in the hospital are outside. Of course, it's a very temperate climate. And all passive strategies, which make sure no matter what kind of energy is happening, that there's a way to get fresh air through the building. and keep people safe from contracting disease. In the wards, the beds face out to nature, a proven public health strategy that people feel better and recover faster when they see nature. You can see actually that this is one hallway in the building with this beautiful big open window. And you see this beautiful volcanic stone, which is from the region. It's pulled out of fields, much like in New England, we have like all these stone walls lining that farmers would pull out the rock from their fields so they could plant. It was never a sort of design material, though. It was either rubble or painted. So this volcanic rock helped us really also reinforce an idea around local craft and labor with this kind of mortarless system, which Anne Marie, called Kokwanzi, has now developed a group of masons who are doing this kind of work all over Rwanda. She was one of the first female masons. It was incredible. She's been working at this now for 15 years. After the hospital, we built housing for doctors so that they had a place to stay while they were coming to work at the hospital. Then there was a need for an oncology center, the first of its kind in the region. In Rwanda, families join the patients when they come for treatment, and so we built housing for families of patients receiving chemotherapy and other treatments. And ultimately, Paul Farmer and Agnes Benewahu initiated the University of Global Health Equity. And I think we can credit these two incredible leaders along with thousands and thousands of other people for centering this idea that the poor and people without access to resources actually deserve the very best. This is where, for those public health practitioners, Paul Farmer actually passed away last year. Kind of incredible, but an amazing sort of understanding of the power of their persuasion, the power of their narrative, and their insistence on the highest and best and using beauty as a tool for justice. So you can kind of see this larger campus of buildings, and remember this place that had no access to medical care becoming a center, a global center. That led us to the government of Rwanda asked if we design then prototypical buildings, hospitals, and we said, well, no, like we're not going to do a prototype. We're not going to do a one-size-fits-all because every site is different and the materiality in different places is different. But we'll do a set of guidelines to regulate the design of hospitals throughout the country. And then we did build two variations, one in a rural setting in Munini, 4 hours south of Rwanda, 180-bed hospital, and one in downtown Kigali in the Nyarugenge district, a very sort of dense urban district. This became like the COVID hospital because, lo and behold, those strategies for the prevention of disease through the design of the architecture was readily available. And our work is expanding now across the continent and further. So this whole project, as you can see, led us to develop quite a large team in Rwanda. We have architects, landscape architects, a full engineering team, a film and narrative team, importantly, always focused on what does it mean to tell the larger story. We have come to learn that the narrative around architecture, what our partners are trying to accomplish, is as important, if not more important, than in some ways the architecture itself in trying to galvanize others to move forward. So here in the US, I think there were many people said, oh, well, that you can do that in Africa, but what are you doing here in the US? And we have a robust team here in Boston, New York, and Santa Fe, New Mexico. Our first big project that kind of put us on the map here, I hope you've all taken a field trip to Montgomery, Alabama to go to the Memorial for Peace and Justice of the Equal Justice Initiative, which not only honors the lives of the over 4,000 victims of lynching, but also helps connect the history of lynching with the current practices in racial terror. Brian Stevenson, again, a visionary leader who has used the power of his vision and words to be able to galvanize policy change throughout the country. At the opening of the Memorial for Peace and Justice, we met these two moms, Pam and Annette from Chicago. They had been united when their sons were killed by gun violence. They approached us and said, we need a memorial to honor the lives of our sons and the thousands of people who are killed by gun violence every year. So we partnered with Hank Willis Thomas, who had an art installation at the Memorial for Peace and Justice, to create a kind of a memorial that would be able to both honor the individual stories of people, but also speak to the numbers and the complexity of this issue. So each of these houses holds 700 bricks, which is the number of people who are killed by gun violence in 1 week in America. But then each of the bricks holds a powerful story of told by the loved ones of this person who's departed. I think these issues of love and grief and story and life and what it means have a central role in architecture. And this project has helped us work with people from across the country to be able to honor those stories and hopefully create change. That's harder. The Embrace just opened in Boston, Massachusetts. It's been wonderful. Some of you may have seen on Twitter in the early days, that was like a blip a narrative blip though, wow. Like maybe if any of you know this, you know that it was on Twitter for like a day. And that's what you know about it because the power of narrative is so extraordinary. But in reality in Boston, this incredible, beautiful project we did in partnership with Hank Willis Thomas has become a way of changing the narrative in Boston. It's the first project built on the Boston Common in 30 years. It honors the love between Dr. Martin Luther King and Coretta Scott King. And it also honors the 65 freedom fighters that are identified in the public plaza. It's become both a place for gathering and reflection in Boston on issues of civil rights and other unrest, and created kind of a platform to discuss many of the other challenges that are happening in Boston. At Mass, we call ourselves a collective. We have 26 principals who each oversee their sort of part of the work. Jadi Amazi leads our public memory and memorial portfolio. And I think that highlighting sort of her personal story and her commitment to the work is part of what makes it powerful for us. Okay, so we're going to go back to Rwanda and talk about the sort of connection between climate, environment, and public health in a project called the Rwanda Institute for Conservation Agriculture, a new school in Rwanda, just graduated last year, its first class of students in a country that has relied on subsistence agriculture, but is still suffering housing insecurity and is going through that process of deforestation to make enough farmland to feed its people. The goal is to create a university that can innovate in sustainable farming methods to be able to feed the country in a different way. So this is now a 69-building new campus, and we project that it will be carbon neutral, climate positive, within 10 years. I want to just pause to say how many people, of course, just on our own team it takes to make these projects happen. Architectural Record was going to publish this project, and they wanted to put like Mass Design Group and the names of a couple of our principals who worked on it. We fought with them to get the names of everyone who worked on it. We ultimately compromised that we did get the names of the 69 architects and landscape architects who worked on the project in the article. We did not get the names of the 22 engineers or, of course, the 2,800 builders in a company we started called Mass Made. But all of these kinds of projects take incredible work and incredible dedication from so many different people. You met Noella earlier. She helped kick off the project with a kind of umaganda, coming together with the local community to understand what the local resources were. In the end, 95% of our labor force came from the exact area and 98% within 100 miles, also understanding what are the local materials. The approach that we used is what we call One Health, and understanding that our environment, our animal life and our human life are all deeply intertwined. If COVID hasn't taught us that, or the bed bugs in Europe, I'm not sure what will. But this was the design charge for this campus, how to build a One Health campus. Focus on embodied carbon. I'm speaking to the choir here on the importance of understanding embodied carbon as 40% of our emissions from buildings worldwide. But this takes this kind of 22 engineers I told you on this project. They're not only doing the structural, but also the kind of deep dive into every single aspect. To get to carbon neutral, you have to go very deep and very specific, where every single decision is analyzed. The timber is a big question. We won't get into all of its sourcing today, but we certainly could with a minimal amount of steel, only as needed. Almost all of the project, so much of the mass of the project come in the walls, and all of the walls are made of earth from the site. These beautiful rammed earth walls, as well as the kind of what they call adobe, they call recuera, but what we would call adobe blocks coming up from the site. We had about a team of about 60 people who could make 800 blocks a day, evaluating the amount of cement in each block. We started with 5%. That was what was structurally tolerable. But in the rainy season, we're like, nope, got to go to 7%. And understanding wastage as a part of the equation. So this is where the details really come into play. Everything in Rwanda, one of the things that's so different as an architect or engineer is that you don't buy anything off the shelf. So there's no speccing. Everything is trying, testing, evaluating, trying again, making mistakes, and getting better over time. It's an incredible place to work for that reason and others. So that intense work on the walls for Rika led to these design specifications. So most of the homes in Rwanda are built with these blocks, but they're not seismically or structurally stable. And so we developed guidelines that are now the national standard for brick production, which has kind of an outsized effect. In doing this entire campus, we also had to furnish it. So we ended up working to develop a network of about 85 different artisans throughout the country who make different parts of now over 200 distinct pieces of furniture, thousands and thousands of units for this project and many others. We now have a furniture company called Mass Made, which is networked from these, this revolves around networking these artisans from around the country for locally sourced material and locally made furniture. Also, of course, planting is the thing that will offset. So planting thousands of acres of the savanna woodlands in order to offset the carbon that is in the project. So I'm going to come back to this question about housing and coming back to sort of seeking home. I think, during COVID, one of the other things we realized was, what's the relationship of home and public health? During COVID, it got quite complicated, right? Because we had known for a while that actually isolation and depression are a greater threat to adults than even death by COVID during the pandemic. So then our approaches, though, during the pandemic are like, well, put everyone in their rooms and don't let them leave. So it turned out that our buildings were not created to keep people healthy in terms of their social interaction, as well as their physical well-being. So we have been working primarily in the senior space to try to develop affordable housing that keeps people socially connected, but also obviously safe from the spread of infectious disease, beginning always with kind of community engagement strategies. We have an incredible scope of work called Purpose-Built. Actually, Patricia Gruitz, one of our executive directors here in blue, has for 10 years been developing this work called Purpose-Built. It's on our website. You can download it for free. It's kind of methodology to turn design engagement into a method of building and then an outcome matrix that you can ideally be able to set your intentions and your outcomes through the process of design and construction. It's a method that we apply in all of our projects. So we're excited that J.J. Carroll built in partnership with Two Life Communities in Brighton, Massachusetts, 152, I believe, units of housing that will be lovely, affordable, beautiful for seniors, built around these kind of pods, I would say. We've been sort of continually taking on the seemingly inevitable, highly efficient, double-loaded corridor. Yeah, we're like anti-double-loaded corridor if we possibly can. So we've been trying to seek ways to say, how do you build community in buildings? And finding different strategies to build what we learned during COVID, we called pods, but could be micro neighborhoods or communities. So pulling buildings apart and allowing fresh air and places for socialization with groups of maybe like 8 or 10 units between buildings. So this is J.J. Carroll's sort of massing diagram and strategy, and we won't get too deep into how this happens throughout, but very excited to see that happen. And then it's under construction, so we're getting close to opening. It will be our first built affordable housing project in the U.S., so we're still learning. We've just won this commission in my neighborhood in Brooklyn on a New York City Housing Authority site. It will be 200 units of senior housing. It also took a kind of larger strategy of understanding first, of course, what is the place and the goals of the people who are there, employing more and more trauma-informed design principles that we've been hard at work that we're going to hear a little bit more about developing. In this case, the double-loaded corridor got pulled apart in a slightly different way, introducing light and air. We were frankly shocked that the New York City Housing Authority said, yes, please, like to balconies and, but I think making the argument, why does it matter? Why does it matter? What's the difference between doing the most efficient double-loaded corridor for people's health and well-being and socialization? Can you ground the design work in this larger picture? And so we're excited to just start to get to work. This was all from the RFP, so we're just starting to get to work on all of this. So those are just a few examples of our robust portfolio. And I'll close and get on with the rest of the conversation. I think around just this larger idea about storytelling for abundance, lifting up the kind of larger narrative. This is a quote from Christian Benimana, who you met earlier. We are not architects to design buildings. That is not our purpose. We are architects to protect and save our planet, to improve the communities in which we live, and to awaken the links that bind us inextricably to one another. And I think if we go back to this idea of what is a definition of the word architect, I think in some ways it could be different to different people. We all come to the work. This is Amab, he's a structural engineer in our Rwanda office. And we go through these exercises like, I do what I do because. And we take a moment to pause on why we each do what we do so that we can then understand what we do together. So I'm offering perhaps a slightly different definition of the word architect that's not the master who oversees the builders or the masons, but rather architecture is a collective act that requires the participation of many people playing different roles according to their expertise, working together to create something larger than themselves, that the object of architecture is to make something that benefits the community at large or solves a systemic issue that the community as a whole has to identify in order to be able to make progress on that issue, and that architecture leverages individual skill, creativity, hard work, but that without collaboration and teamwork, it's impossible to achieve something lasting at scale. So thank you very much for the invitation to speak with you today, and it's a joy to be part of your community. Thank you.
Thank you, Katie. Now we're going local. Next up, we have an architect and community developer that collaborate on local projects with health at the forefront of design and planning. John Hagar is the principal and director of affordable housing at Forgecraft Architecture and Design. He earned his BFA from the University of Michigan and his master's in architecture from Tulane University. Having worked in Austin, New Orleans, and St. Louis, he has experienced a broad range of projects with a focus on affordable housing and prefab modular office work. John's fine arts background imbues his design process with creative energy. He is particularly interested in expressing design intent through careful execution. In recent years, his expertise is extended to volunteer work with the East MLK Neighborhood Plan Contact Team, Community Powered Workshop, and Preservation Austin. And then Anna Lake Smith is a senior design manager at Foundation Communities. She develops teams to take projects through feasibility, design, and construction, including coordinating with the sustainability, property, and asset management teams. Anna brings a wide range of design experience from residential to interiors to citywide planning strategies. Anna holds a dual MS in urban design and an MS in community regional planning from the University of Texas at Austin, and a Bachelor of Arts in Architecture from Wesley College. Come up.
Thank you all for being here today. It's so nice to see so many familiar faces and a lot of new faces. I think, we're all working towards making Austin a better, more livable community. So it's really nice to see the commitment of everyone here today. So John and I are going to talk about our longstanding partnership. We've been working together for many years, and personally we've been working together for about 5 years. So we've got 4 projects up on the screen here. The 2 on the left we're not going to talk about quite so much, but we've got Capitol Studios on the left, Bluebonnet Studios, Waterloo Studios, and most recently Zilker Studios. And we're going to talk about sort of this evolution of this product type that we've been working on, the single resident occupancy building. We'll talk a little bit more about what that means and who lives there, but really sort of emphasizing that this is an iterative process and we are all learning as we go, and we are just trying to make each building a little bit better than the last. Just a quick background, Foundation Communities, we are a developer owner, so we're a little bit unique in the sense that we are involved in the lifetime of the project. So we are, everything from acquisition of the land through the design and construction of the project, and then we also do our own in-house property management, asset management, and a lot of the services are also under the same umbrella. So that gives us this really unique ability to be our own feedback loop, learn from our own experiences and sometimes mistakes, often mistakes. And so we've really, as an organization, made a firm commitment to these 4 pillars of housing, education, financial stability, and health. And so you'll see those elements come through the design of the buildings. And you'll see I'm very happy to announce that we just opened our 28th community up in North Austin, is leasing this week.
My name is John Hagar. I'm principal at Forgecraft Architecture and Design. We've opened our doors about 10 years ago, and from the outset have been working in affordable housing, and specifically with the team at Foundation Communities. We believe strongly that architecture can change people's lives, and in order to do that, we have to focus on those people. So whether those are residents of a building, whether those are people who work in the building, whether those are people who visit the building, it's focus on the people that matters. To kind of echo some of the things that Katie was talking about, you have to really understand the people that are using the building in order to do that. So we believe that really an architect's first job is to listen to the people who are going to be using the building and kind of check your ego at the door. As Anna mentioned, we're going to be talking about our 3rd and 4th project with Foundation Communities. We've got another one in construction now, and then hopefully another larger one happening pretty soon. But those things that you can't ever bet on those things until they're actually happening. But very happy to be with you here today.
Okay, so we're going to look at Waterloo Terrace here, which opened in 2020, which, as I'm sure y'all know, was a challenge in and of itself. But Waterloo Terrace is a 132 studio efficiency units up in North Austin, just west of Mopac. It is a single resident occupancy, and so that is one of the two product types that Foundation Communities builds. We've got our studios for single adults, and then we've also got sort of more typical family type communities, 1, 2, 3 bedrooms. I'm not going to focus on those quite as much. So that's what we're working with here. This project did earn AEGB 4-star rating and LEED Gold. I'll let John talk a little bit about some of the challenges of this site.
So when you're doing affordable housing or supportive housing in an urban area, you don't always get the pick of the nicest, cleanest, most easily to work on site in the city. Usually it's exactly the opposite. This is no exception. This is sited on the Mopac frontage road up in North Austin. It's a long, skinny site, east to west, with Mopac on the east, and thankfully a green belt to the west. So being on a frontage road, obviously you're dealing with a significant amount of both air and noise pollution, things that need to be mitigated in your design. We also had a significant amount of slope across the site, and so getting a long, skinny building to work going the wrong way down a hill is a challenging thing to do. But I think we were able to pull it off, as you'll see shortly.
Our most recent project is Zilker Studios. As of, everyone fingers crossed, next week we'll be 100% leased and occupied. And this was a specific challenge because we were basically given this site, and so we said, yep, great, we want it, we love it, we'll make it work. So I'll let John talk a little bit more about those site features, but we ended up with 110 efficiency units. That tends to be our sweet spot in terms of really creating a robust community. About 110 is kind of the right size for that. This is a 7-story building, and it was one of the first projects to use affordability unlocked, and that was hugely important for us. We got about 44 extra units because we were able to use that program. And we're hoping for AEGB 4-star. We're still working on closeout.
So this one also challenging for pretty different reasons. So this is a half-acre site, and so do the math. Fitting 110 units on a half-acre site is challenging without additional constraints. We had 3 heritage live oaks on the site, and those of you who work in Austin know that our heritage live oaks are sacred, and there's really you can't do much except for kind of pour your building in the gaps between the trees, which is what we eventually had to do. We also had about 15 feet of slope on this one too, going up from Lamar. And so we also had to deal with not only that elevation change, but working around the elevations that the trees were at, because they weren't, of course, all at the same elevation. And then again, this is on South Lamar Boulevard, maybe not quite as bad as Mopac, but it's still noisy and there's still a lot of air pollution. And so those are things that need to be mitigated here as well. So we're going to talk a bit about trauma-informed design and the way that it reinforces efforts to improve resident health. If anyone is interested, it's okay if I make a plug. In a couple of weeks, I'll be on a panel at Texas State Affordable Housing Corporation's Permanent Supportive Housing Symposium, November 6th and November 7th, where we'll be diving into trauma-informed design practices in a little more depth, if anyone wants to learn more about this. But what trauma-informed design is it's an approach to design that tries to reinforce the practice of trauma-informed care. It's a relatively new field of study in architecture. I think it's a lot of things that we have all done intuitively for a long time, but it's just, we're being explicit about it now. The goal is to design for healing, for dignity, and for joy. We try to do no harm, so we're trying to avoid re-traumatizing people. In order to do that, you have to understand that each person brings expertise and their own lived experience. And so that specific person's point of view needs to be accommodated in the design. The goal here is not to find the most common experience and design to that, but find the broadest range of experiences possible and try to understand how you're going to accommodate all of them. And especially when you're talking about permanent supportive housing, this means engaging with residents early. Now, you usually don't know who those residents of the final building are going to be, but if you're working with someone like Foundation Communities or someone else who has existing resident populations, you need to talk to them. You also really need to talk to staff because they're using the building on a day-to-day basis. they understand their operations, and they can experience trauma as part of their jobs as well. There's a lot that goes to this, and it's sort of an ever-evolving understanding, but essentially things are organized around 3 C's, and those are connection, comfort, and choice. And I just have to give credit where credit's due. We've learned a lot of what we know about trauma-informed design from a group called Shopworks Architecture based out of Denver. They have really incredible literature that they've developed on their website if anyone wants to access that. So starting with connection. Connection means connecting to your community, means connecting to your neighbors. It can even mean connecting to your own past inside your home. And it occurs in different ways and through different layers. And one of the things that we need to understand is that people connect naturally in different ways. Some people like connecting in larger spaces. Some people like connecting in smaller spaces. Some people prefer to avoid connection whenever possible, and so that's something you have to work around sometimes. At Zilker Studios, we designed to this idea of connection in a couple ways. This image on the right here, the rendered floor plan, you can see the 2 live oaks that we were able to save on that site. Sort of organized the common space and the open space between them. We worked closely with our landscape architect, who I actually see back there in the back of the room, to make sure that all these spaces were really well integrated, that we're making use of this very limited available exterior space. But we also made sure that from all of the interior common spaces within the building, you had a view of at least one of those trees, and in most cases, you had a view of both of those trees. Those trees are really the anchor to they're kind of the heart of the project. So you can see that with those 2 blue lines there. Another thing that we were able to do in this project is in the kind of elbow between those trees, we introduced a vertical opening through the building podium and up through the roof, which took a little bit of negotiating with city staff to get their buy-in from a code perspective. But it also gives us vertical connection from those ground level common spaces all the way up through each individual level. The elevators come up around that opening. Most of the common spaces organized around that opening. And it allows for vertical and horizontal connection, gives people a chance to sort of see what's happening downstairs before they decide to go down and join in.
A little bit, at the risk of sounding like I'm defending a double-loaded corridor, one of the most valuable things we learned between Waterloo and Zilker was this idea of using the architecture to define different scales of space. So because of the shape of the site, Waterloo was a singular large courtyard, which we were initially really excited about. It's all single-loaded corridors around the courtyard. We thought that'll be great for airflow and sight lines and community, but what we didn't quite factor in was this element of choice, which we're going to get to in a minute, but this idea that some folks don't want to be quite so visible. We need more sort of variation in the types of units that we're providing, because all of our residents are very varied, right, in their experiences and their preferences. And so with Zilker, we were really able to use the building and the architecture to carve out different scales of spaces. Some units are closer to the social hub, some are a little bit further away from that and quieter as a result. And so I think that was a really important takeaway for us, was to, again, check our assumptions and our expectations of how the building would perform. We've spent a lot of time trying to understand from our staff and our residents how these different moves affect the folks who live in the building. So we just went back and did another 3-year check-in with our Waterloo staff, and that was one of the really valuable things that we heard from them.
Comfort. So comfort can mean a few things. It can be just physical comfort. It can mean, are you able to find joy in a space? It can mean, do you feel safe, and not just literal safety, such as did my door close properly or does the handrail feel secure? But do you feel safe? Are you, can you see where you want to see? Do you feel like you're visible enough, or do you feel too visible? People have different responses to different conditions. And so you need to think about providing different types of spaces so that people can feel comfortable. There are some pretty common themes, though: maintaining good sight lines, and avoiding hidden or dark corners. When you're talking about permanent supportive housing, one of the things that we've learned over and over from both residents and staff is that we want visibility between staff and residents. Staff want to be able to see residents so they can observe what's going on, but it also, when somebody comes in the door, they want to be able to see them, get a kind of visual check on how they're doing. But residents also want to be seen by staff when they're in a common place. They want to know that somebody's got their eye on them because people are bringing traumas from their past, especially if they're coming out of homelessness, where if you are not visible, then you're in a place where you could be in danger. And so trying to maintain those sightlines is pretty crucial. Providing soothing color palettes and material palettes, trying to use natural materials when possible. A lot of times in affordable housing, you have limited opportunities to do that, but paint is a good, inexpensive way to bring some visual interest. Just make sure that you're doing it with comfort in mind. Biophilia is incredibly important. Katie talked about this, but we know that connection to nature lowers our anxiety levels. It helps us sleep better. Providing diffuse light and good acoustic treatments so that you're not getting harsh experiences or glare, either visually or auditory. And then providing elite indoor air quality is really important. And kind of conventional multifamily approach to mechanical system is anything that's slightly above code minimum is over-designed. That's not the approach we take in our permanent supportive housing. Air quality is so important to resident health, and we're learning more and more about this all the time. And if you can manage air quality, if you can manage humidity, if you can manage indoor pollutants, people sleep better, they're happier, they're healthier, they can recover better. And if you can do that, then the building is actually a tool for the nonprofit or developer owner that you're working with to help promote the healing that they're trying to achieve with their residents. People who sleep better heal better. Couple images here. The top one is from Waterloo Terrace. Again, you're coming in off of that frontage road from the parking area, and the first thing you see is this really lush rain garden filled with native Texas plants. So try to reset internally with a good natural experience after coming off the highway. And then a couple images below from Zilker Studios kind of showing those sight lines. So open corridors, long views through resident amenities such as mailboxes, and then at the front desk making sure lots of glass, lots of visibility. Other things we can do, clear wayfinding, so using images when possible. These are designed courtesy of my partner Anna here. I can't take credit for those. Large windows, as large as you can afford, and natural materials. We're talking about mechanical systems again. In our SROs, we've arrived at a strategy of using the humble PTAC as your primary heating and cooling mechanism, and then relying on a dedicated outdoor air system, usually with rooftop units, to handle, to manage fresh air, air filtration, and humidity control. That does a couple things. One, it's by decoupling those two systems, the part of your HVAC system that deals with humidity and therefore potentially mold is a passive system in the sense that the resident doesn't control it and the resident really doesn't know it's there. And so your humidity is being managed regardless of resident behavior. One of the things that happens, especially with folks coming out of homelessness, people have very different thermal comfort levels. And if you're relying specifically on your HVAC, your cooling or heating to manage humidity, well, you're going to get different results depending on people's kind of natural behaviors. By decoupling the DOAS, we get that managed no matter what. Also because the DOAS does kind of the lion's share of the work, it makes a fairly predictable energy bill for the owner because it's always going. And then your PTAC just becomes basically there for resident comfort. People can tune it up or down as they feel fit, but it's not really affecting humidity. And we've got data from the past few years that show that it really works with humidity levels staying, 45 to 50% year round. So, managing humidity in this climate is a huge issue, and this is a system that really works.
Just on comfort, I'll add another thing we learned between Waterloo and Zilker Studios is we've actually made our units smaller. I know that's sort of counterintuitive, but Waterloo has very large studios. They're 518 square feet each. And what we found was that was too big to be comfortable. For folks moving in who don't maybe have a lot of furniture or a lot of belongings, those units can feel really vacuous. And so for Zilker, they're about 435 square feet, and so far, folks have only been in a couple months, but we found that that's a much better size that feels more comfortable for more people.
Okay, and then last one is choice. Giving residents the opportunity to personalize their experience of the building, whether that's personalizing their homes or personalizing the way they take through the building to get to their home. Again, Anna mentioned, one of the things we learned on Waterloo Terrace is that some people are reacting negatively to the fact that they only had one way to get to their home, and that was through a very visible kind of public experience. And so, moving forward, that's one of the choices that we need to acknowledge, do better of acknowledging. Providing multiple ways in and out of spaces is really important. It's important for safety, and it's important for people's sort of mental well-being. This is important for staff. If you're dealing with a population that can be prone to crises of mental health, making sure that staff has multiple ways to get out of any situation is important, so they're not stuck in a dead-end situation. It's also important for residents, if somebody doesn't feel like squeezing by someone to get out of the laundry room or to check their mail. If they have two ways in and out, then they don't have to do that, and you're keeping their anxieties lower. And again, do no harm. You're avoiding re-traumatizing someone. A couple of pictures here. The one on the left I don't think totally relates specifically. He doesn't actually, that's Jeffrey. He doesn't live at Zilker Studios, but this is a stairway that leads to the primary resident stairway up through the building. Now we have 5 stories of residential units on this project, so the reality is that the majority of people are probably not taking the stairs, especially during a Texas summer, but we always try to prioritize the location of a stair over the location of an elevator to encourage people to take the stairs or remind them that the stairs are there if they want to. Just having the choice to have a nice walk up to your unit is good. And then this image on the right is in the courtyard at Waterloo. One of the things we learned from a resident feedback session at the beginning of design, we were talking with some folks who lived at Bluebonnet Studios, which is one we had done previous to this. And there was one resident there who we had exterior walkways at that project as well. And his unit was just at the end of the walkway, and he just happened to have a little more space outside his unit. And he took that opportunity to amass this incredible potted plant garden. And you could see the plants hanging over the ground from the street. It was amazing. And the residents there said, well, it would be nice if everybody had that opportunity. We all love his garden, but nobody else can do that because we've got kind of a narrow hallway out in front of our unit, and the most we can do is maybe hang something on the door. Because we were designed around a central courtyard in this project, we cantilevered sections of the walkways outside people's doors out 24, 30 inches to give people a chance to personalize their spaces in that way. We called it a falcony for a front balcony because we were thinking about frunks and Teslas. But people are personalizing these spaces in a lot of different ways. You can see, plants out here. Some people have table and chairs. Some people choose not to have anything, but it acts as kind of a front stoop, and it acts as a way to kind of recognize your place when you're walking home, which is a really nice feature, I think. And I'd like to take a moment to just touch on accessibility in our projects with foundation communities. Although it's not specifically related to trauma-informed design, it's an equity issue, and I think it's really important. When you're working in permanent supportive housing, you're working for a population with much higher incidence of mobility impairments. And so rather than treating accessibility as something that you have to do, you have to make sure that you've covered at the end of a project, we always try to design around the user in a wheelchair or the user in a walker or the user with another impairment. We know from years of experience through the ADA that design decisions that benefit someone in a wheelchair benefit everyone. Curb cuts are there because of people with mobility impairments, but we all benefit from them if you're pushing a stroller, walking a rolly bag or something. And so we take that approach in our work with foundation communities and elsewhere. On Waterloo Terrace, we had a significant amount of slope across the building, about 15 feet from one side to the other. It's a full story drop. And we had designed this beautiful, or we were planning to design this beautiful courtyard. And the question was, how do we manage that slope within this courtyard and make it an equitable experience for people with mobility impairments? What we don't want to do is have this terrace thing where if you're in a wheelchair, you have to go back and around and take the elevator down to get to another space. What we also didn't want is to have a sea of handrails and guardrails going through the space and making it ugly. So we worked very closely with the landscape architect on this one, and this blue line here traces the accessible path to the courtyard. It goes down a full 11 feet over the course of the building. There are also rain gardens dotted throughout that courtyard that are taking rainwater from the roof. And as the accessible path kind of meanders back and forth, it's carving out different sized common spaces on the outside seating areas. There's a lawn. Downstairs we've got a grill and some larger sort of bench seating. So it's providing some of those different scales of common space that are important for people to be able to choose the scale that's appropriate for them, but it's also making it that equitable experience. So the person in the wheelchair and the person who's walking have the same access and the same experience in the space.
Yeah, as John mentioned, we recognize that the population we're serving has a greater need for these accessibility features. I think generally speaking, we say 50% of our residents would benefit from some type of mobility assistance. But I was looking at some of the data earlier this week, and some of our properties, for self-reported folks with disabilities, one of our properties is 99%. So when we're choosing to design with accessibility as a priority, we really are serving the entire community. And so I think that that's something that is near and dear to our hearts, and something that we really set from the outset, like day one, this will be a priority, and this is something that we will do right. We're never going to be 100% of the way there. There's still a long way to go. As of right now, we build 10% of our units to be fully mobility accessible. We're looking at increasing that number just because of who our resident population is. And one thing that I am really happy to say is that 100% of our new our new SRO units, they're all adaptable. So if somebody were to move into that unit and say, I need grab bars, I need a workstation in the kitchen to be able to pull my wheelchair into, we can make that happen for them. And so we are a lot of the way there, but I think there's still room for improvement.
I'll say a couple things related to the building and resiliency. We're in working for someone like Foundation Communities, you're working for a legacy owner. So you're not thinking 5 or 7 years down the line in terms of ROI, you're thinking, hopefully 50 years or more. You're talking about, well, what's it going to be like to maintain this finish in 25 years or 50 years? It's a different kind of conversation than you typically have on conventional market rate multifamily. So one of our big focus is on building envelope. We work with an envelope consultant. We work with other experts in the field through the iterative process. We have feedback from the owner on what's working and what isn't. And we're constantly learning ourselves. So on Waterloo, we had an R21 cavity insulation, 2x6 walls with advanced framing. And then we used Zip-R with R6 continuous insulation for the entirety of the building. When we were doing energy modeling for Zilker Studios, we learned that R6 continuous insulation outside of the cavity wall with the advanced framing, we're kind of past the point of diminishing returns. Yes, it was helping us out, but not as much as investing that money in more efficient water heaters or investing that money in the rooftop DOAS system. I also see our mechanical engineer for both of these projects back there. So it's through that iterative process and through our own learning, through energy modeling, we can make each one a little bit better, even if it's, reducing the amount of insulation in the walls might not seem like something that you would want to do. But if you can take those limited resources and put them somewhere where they're going to get even more benefit to the users and to the owners, then it's worth it.
Yeah, so as John mentioned, we are a legacy owner, and that means that we get to come into our early conversations with a very different mindset. We're going to own these buildings in perpetuity. We have no intention of ever selling a building. And when we're talking about the health of our residents, like, we are talking about individual specific people. We have a lot of folks who've lived with us for 10, 15 years, and we hope that they continue to choose to stay. And so we really are able to focus on building sustainably because it's the responsible way to build, and it's the most efficient and effective for us long term. We talk a lot about durability. All of our interior finishes, we're all taking home, spilling coffee on, rubbing dog hair on, because we really want to make sure that we're picking things that are going to last. We also want to make sure that we can fix the systems that we design. We spend a lot of time sort of anytime somebody proposes a smart system or whatever, we say, no, thank you, we'd like the dumb version, please. We want things that are going to be able to work for new staff to be able to come in and say, yes, I can fix that. And so for us, that is a unique priority, and something that we get to choose. One thing that's on here that I think we've been getting some questions about lately is our bed bug hot room, or we call it the bed bug oven. Formally, it's our pest control room. But that is a concept from some of our peers around the country, really hoping to treat the influx of bed bugs in our populations. We do spend a lot of money on bed bug remediation, so we thought maybe there's an architectural solution to this. So we piloted it at Waterloo Terrace. I think our big takeaway there is that it does actually need to be operational when you start moving people in, because it's harder to fix that retroactively. But we've tried it again at Zilker Studios. And one thing I will say is we try not to make the same mistake more than twice, because it takes 3 years for a project to start and finish. We're already on to the next one by the time usually we've learned the valuable lesson from the first one. So we're currently evaluating if we want to do it again. I think we're ironing out some of the kinks, but you have to load a resident's belongings in where they have to relinquish control of them. They're sitting in that room cooking basically for 4 hours. That really slows down our move-in process, creates a bottleneck, and it's not something that we have totally solved for. So jury's still out, but ask us again in a year how we feel about it. I'll speed through this a little bit, but I just wanted to talk about sort of the larger impact of living at Foundation Communities. Yes, our priority is housing folks, but we really want to help people stay in that housing. So our on-site amenities are a long list of things that help make a place feel like home, sort of getting at the things that we were talking about earlier. We offer a lot of programming at our properties, especially at the SRO properties. And we have really incredible staff who offer these services. We work with a lot of really great community partners. And a lot of this is going to be focused on health education for our residents. And then just the broader impact of Foundation Communities. So we've got 8 SRO properties, all of which have their own food pantries and their own internal programming. We also have 14 pantries across Austin in our family communities and at our main office. Those are open to the general public. They are going to serve fresh produce and staple items like rice, beans, milk, eggs, and it's completely free and open to everyone. These are the 2022 numbers, but we served over 200,000 pounds of food last year. In October, right now, 2023, we've already served over 250,000 pounds. So we really can see the impact of this work and how important it is to the general health of the Austin community. And then just wanted to show how busy our health initiatives department is. This is an internal department to Foundation Communities who runs all of our food banks and our health programming. These are all of the classes, and the food pantries open across Austin, and these are all open to the public. So if you know somebody who needs a little help with food or just wants to grab a yoga class, please check out our list of programming on our website. And we just wanted to end on this slide. Speaking of public health, this is the dog park at Waterloo Terrace. We technically don't allow pets, but we have so many support and service animals that this arose as an amenity need. And so we really are focusing on what our residents need and who those people are and how we can better provide stable housing for them.
We're going to do a quick Q&A. Does anybody have a question? Right here.
When you're doing trauma-informed design, I wonder about certain considerations for life safety and for this population, and what you talked about some of the considerations with the natural light and the hallways and multiple points of entrance, exit. But I just wonder, do you have fire drills, and do you think about sheltering in place rather than that? So if you could speak to that.
Yeah, thank you. That's a great question. We definitely think about life safety a lot. We talk about it a lot. We have on staff, we have a risk and safety manager who does basically an audit of all of our properties and helps design the protocols, emergency protocols for our properties. One thing we've been talking a lot about since the great freeze is how do we shelter in place better, and what does that mean for our existing portfolio and future communities? Are we storing potable water? Do we have backup power? How are we starting to serve those residents better? When Waterloo Terrace had just started leasing when we had the big storm, and one of our neighboring properties, Spring Terrace, had a pipe explode, we were able to move in 50 residents from Spring into Waterloo, which was really fortuitous and something we couldn't have planned for, but now we're better prepared. We spent a lot of time talking about heat tracing on our water pipes, and so how do we better prevent bigger issues? But yes, we certainly do things like fire drills. When we were designing the initial site layout, we think about, okay, well, if an ambulance needs to visit, where are they going to park? Where are they going to pull up? How do they get in the building? So yes, we're very much having all of these kinds of conversations throughout the process.
I saw that on the locations of a lot of projects, Bangladesh was one of the places you had. Now, electricity is not like here, right? You can get 99.9% time electricity. How is it designed, accommodating where there is not 100% electric availability?
Let's see, we're building a hospital with Muhammad Yunus. So I think it's our largest project to date planned. So I wish I could give you all the details on all of the systems. I can almost guarantee that we're deploying as many of those passive systems as possible as reinforcements. But I think I'll have to get into details with the project team better to help answer your question specifically. Yeah, thank you.
One of the, I think, least talked about aspects of sustainability is usually social buy-in in terms of the longevity of projects. And you guys both spoke about projects that deal with that, whether it's the masonry building and what I know about your rammed earth projects, or the community gardens that you guys were speaking about and giving people kind of community buy-in into all of this. Are there any opportunities that you guys have thought of, even if it's outside of the typologies that you normally work in, for that kind of buy-in to help the longevity of projects, just in general, not necessarily even in socially conscious projects, even if it's a personal one?
We have a project in design right now in East Austin. It's hopefully getting permitted this week. And it's next door to an elementary school. So we've been talking with community partners, arts organizations, about how do we get the kids to help design a mural for the project so that they really feel connected to this big new building we're going to put right next to their school. And so how do we tie that into the history of the neighborhood? So yes, we work with partner organizations who help us with that community outreach piece. At Zilker Studios, we worked with Creative Action to design a mural for the common room, and they helped us. They came in and did an engagement process with the first residents, and it was pretty simple, straightforward. Like, what kind of themes would you like to see on a mural? What kinds of color schemes feel like home to you? And so they designed and painted a really beautiful floral mural for us. So working with community partners is sort of how we help extend into the community.
And I guess the question, like, what level of community, right? There's the folks who live in the building and take care of it every day, and then the neighborhood. And, we've had a long-standing issue in our country with the kind of not in my backyard mentality. So I think it's been really exciting to see some communities have really embraced design as a strategy to make sure that, you're building the very best projects that uplift a neighborhood. No matter, people fear, like, the people who live in the building, which is tragic. but how can design be a strategy? And I mean, these beautiful, I've been to a number of foundation community buildings. I've been to Capitol Studios. I haven't been to your recent ones. But I think when you bring that high level of design and it uplifts the whole neighborhood, few people talk about that not in my backyard after a project like that's built. It's like this kind of weird fear factor that's so unfortunate before it's built. But it's beautiful when you see really high level of design articulation, allow everybody to feel good about it and feel like it's a good neighbor.
I want to thanks for the wonderful presentations first. Like I learned a lot. Thanks for coming all the way to Austin. And for community engagement, it's like biggest part of my job also. And then my favorite part of my job, I have one later this evening also. But those greatest joy comes with greatest obstacles, some difficulties sometimes. So I want to ask like, what was your biggest hardship while doing it? Like, and how did you deal with this or something like that?
You know, I had a funny moment when we were doing the Afrotect video. We have a young woman who is Kenyan and American who was working in our Rwandan office. And we were asking about these words like umuganda and all these things. And she says, you know, at home, community service is a punishment. Right? So like all of you in this room talk about community engagement as like this really robust, vital part. But unfortunately, we don't really have a ethos around it. So in the community development field, we're trying to develop that, right? And so it's interesting to look at a place, you know, I use the Rwanda example, where every month, every member of society participates. And this idea about sort of helping out each other is more common. So I think in the US, the idea of community service as a punishment, perhaps, not to you all, and then community engagement, and then where does community engagement also translate into the long-term built projects? So, you know, and who's the community and who gets to decide and all these things. I mean, I think it's all very, very complicated. I would say for me personally, probably the earliest issues that I had was when I was a sort of younger Rose Fellow working in a neighborhood. And I had this idea that we would create a design center, which we later did. We created the Charlottesville Community Design Center. And my dear colleague, Michael Gatto, later was part of a group who created the Austin Community Design and Development Center, right? So we were all part of that movement. But when I first started in my first year, I was like, I'm going to use design to save the world. And there was a house in the corner of 10th and Page in the neighborhood that I was working in that was slated for demolition. It was really in bad shape. And I was like, I'm going to move in, put some Homosote on the walls, and like build a little design studio in the center of the neighborhood. And what do you know, like I wasn't that welcome, you know? And so like I'd moved in, I'd like put the Homosote up, I'd painted it, I was like ready to go, and come one day and the doors banged in and the windows are banged out and all that kind of stuff. And it's like, okay, I got it. Like proceed slowly and with caution, and like proceed, you know, like with the degree of trust that you've been able to build up. So I know I came in ready to like engage community, but I wasn't part of that community yet, and I hadn't earned the trust. So I hadn't earned the chance to be able to be there yet. So you learn sometimes the hard way, but good luck with your event tonight, and maybe you can get some volunteers here.
A special thank you to our speakers and our attendees. Please feel free to stick around and enjoy the food that we have in the back and do some social engagement.